The dust kicked up by the transport truck settled around recruit Kira Nakamura as she stepped onto the sun-baked asphalt of Fort Braxton Advanced Combat Training Center. The North Carolina heat hit her like a wall, but she kept her shoulders squared and her expression neutral as she surveyed the sprawling complex of concrete buildings and obstacle courses that would be her home for the next 16 weeks. Around her, fellow recruits grabbed their gear bags and began forming loose groups, the natural sorting that happened when strangers found themselves thrust together. Kira noticed the sideways glances, the barely concealed smirks as the other recruits sized her up. At 5 feet 4 inches and 120 pounds, she understood their skepticism. In a program designed to produce the military's elite combat specialists, she looked more like she belonged in an office than on a battlefield. Drill Instructor Wade Bronson emerged from the nearest building like a storm cloud given human form. His massive frame cast a shadow across the assembly area as he surveyed the new arrivals with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of hopefuls come and go. His gaze lingered on Kira for a moment longer than the others, and she caught the slight shake of his head. "Welcome to hell, maggots," Bronson bellowed, his voice carrying across the compound. "Half of you will wash out in the first month. The other half will wish you had." He began pacing in front of the assembled recruits, his boots striking the pavement with military precision. "This program is designed to break you down and rebuild you into something the enemy fears. But some of you clearly took a wrong turn on your way to basic secretarial school." The comment drew snickers from several male recruits, and Kira felt their eyes on her again. She kept her face impassive, her breathing steady. She had heard variations of this speech before, in different places from different instructors who thought they knew what she was capable of based on appearances alone. Before we dive into this journey of proving yourself, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed someone overcome the odds where you're from. Recruit Marcus Kellerman, a thick-necked former college linebacker, nudged his buddy and whispered loud enough for Kira to hear. $20, says the little Asian girl taps out before week 2. His companion, a lanky Texan named Brett Carlson, grinned and extended his hand for the bet. Bronson continued his orientation speech, outlining the grueling schedule that awaited them. 6 a.m. physical training, followed by tactical instruction, weapons handling, combat scenarios, and evening conditioning that would push their bodies to the breaking point. As he spoke, Kira noticed how his eyes kept returning to her, as if she were a problem he needed to solve. The administrative building loomed ahead as they were marched inside for processing. Kira found herself in line behind 2 recruits who seemed determined to make their opinions known about her presence in the program. "This is supposed to be elite training," one muttered, "not some diversity experiment." His companion nodded agreement. Command must be desperate to fill quotas if they're letting people like her through the door. Kira had learned long ago that responding to such comments only escalated situations unnecessarily. Instead, she focused on the bureaucratic process ahead, knowing that her actions in the coming weeks would speak louder than any words she might offer now. The paperwork, medical checks, and equipment distribution passed in a blur of military efficiency. As evening approached and the recruits were finally dismissed to their barracks, Kira found herself walking alone across the compound. The other recruits had naturally formed their alliances and social groups, but she remained apart, an outsider looking in. She did not mind the solitude. It gave her time to observe and assess both the physical challenges ahead and the human dynamics that would prove equally important to navigate. The pre-dawn darkness shattered at precisely 0500 hours as Drill Instructor Bronson's whistle pierced the barrack silence. Fluorescent lights blazed to life, transforming the sleeping quarters into a harsh landscape of scrambling bodies and shouted commands. Kira had been awake for 10 minutes already, her internal clock calibrated by years of disciplined routine, but she played along with the chaos as recruits tumbled from their bunks. "You have 3 minutes to be dressed and in formation," Bronson roared from the doorway. "Anyone not ready gets to enjoy extra conditioning courtesy of the obstacle course." The mad dash that followed revealed the first cracks in several recruits' composure. Kellerman struggled with his boot laces, cursing under his breath, while Carlson managed to put his shirt on backwards in his haste. Kira moved with efficient precision, each motion deliberate and economical, drawing annoyed glances from her bunkmates who were still fumbling with their gear. The formation outside was barely organized chaos. Bronson walked the line, his practiced eye cataloging every wrinkled uniform, crooked name tape, and improperly secured piece of equipment. When he reached Kira, he stopped and examined her appearance with particular attention, clearly searching for any flaw that would justify singling her out. Well, he said loudly enough for the entire formation to hear. Looks like someone actually knows how to dress themselves. Too bad military readiness requires more than looking pretty in uniform. The comment sent ripples of laughter through the ranks. Kira maintained her position of attention, eyes focused straight ahead, refusing to give Bronson the reaction he was fishing for. She understood the game being played here, the deliberate attempt to isolate her and make her question her place in the program. The morning physical training session began with a 3-meal run through the pine forest surrounding the base. Bronson set a punishing pace, testing the recruits' cardiovascular conditioning and mental toughness from day one. Within the first mile, the formation had stretched into a long line of struggling runners, with several already falling dangerously behind. Kira found herself running in the middle of the pack, her breathing controlled and her stride efficient. She could have easily moved to the front, but experience had taught her the value of observing before revealing capabilities. Behind her, she could hear Kellerman's labored breathing and increasingly creative profanity as he struggled to maintain the pace. "Come on, princess," Kellerman gasped between breaths. "At least try to look like you belong here." The weapons familiarization session that followed the run proved equally revealing. Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Elena Vasquez demonstrated the proper handling of the M4 carbine, breaking down each component with mechanical precision. The recruits were then required to field strip and reassemble their weapons under time pressure. Kira's hands moved across the weapon with practiced familiarity, muscle memory guiding each motion. She completed the exercise well within the time limit, her reassembled rifle passing inspection without comment. Around her, other recruits struggled with unfamiliar mechanisms, their fumbling attempts drawing increasingly sharp criticism from the instructors. "Beginner's luck," Carlson muttered as they moved to the next station. Daddy probably let her play with his hunting rifles back home. The tactical movement exercise proved more challenging for several recruits who had never experienced military-style maneuvering. Bronson demonstrated proper low-crawl technique, emphasizing how exposure could mean death in combat situations. As the recruits attempted to navigate a course of obstacles while staying below imaginary enemy sight lines, the differences in their backgrounds became apparent. Kira moved through the course like smoke, her body naturally finding the most efficient paths while maintaining perfect concealment discipline. Her movements were so fluid that even Bronson paused his constant stream of criticism to watch her progress. The momentary silence was broken by his gruff observation that even blind luck runs out eventually. As the day progressed through combat medical training and equipment maintenance, a pattern emerged. While other recruits struggled with unfamiliar concepts and techniques, Kira demonstrated competence that bordered on the suspicious. Her field dressing application was textbook perfect, her equipment maintenance exceeded standards, and her situational awareness remained consistently sharp. The evening meal provided the first opportunity for informal interaction among the recruits. Kira sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her regulation portions while observing the social dynamics forming around her. Most recruits had naturally gravitated toward others with similar backgrounds or interests, forming the small groups that would either support each other or create internal conflicts as training intensified. Kellerman approached her table with false confidence, his earlier struggles apparently forgotten in favor of establishing dominance through intimidation. "Mind if we join you, sweetheart?" His tone carried just enough mockery to make his intentions clear while maintaining plausible deniability if challenged by instructors. "Free country," Kira replied, without looking up from her meal. Her voice was calm and neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile, giving him nothing to escalate against. Must be nice having such low expectations, Kellerman continued as he sat down uninvited. Rest of us actually have to work to meet standard around here. Kira finished her meal in silence, cleaned her tray, and left the mess hall without acknowledging his presence further. She understood that engaging with his provocations would only validate his behavior and potentially compromise her position in the program. Better to let her performance speak for itself and avoid unnecessary conflicts that could derail her objectives. Week 2 brought increased intensity and the first signs of deliberate sabotage. The obstacle course had been modified overnight, incorporating rope climbs, wall scaling, and precision jumping that demanded both strength and technique. As the recruits assembled in the gray pre-dawn light, Bronson announced that performance rankings would now be posted publicly, adding a competitive edge that immediately heightened tensions. Kira noticed something was wrong with her gear the moment she picked up her pack. The weight distribution fell off, too heavy on one side, and when she opened it for inspection, she found someone had filled one compartment with rocks and sand. Around her, Kellerman and his growing circle of allies watched with barely concealed anticipation, waiting for her to complain or ask for assistance. Instead, she simply redistributed the contents, removed the foreign material, and shouldered her pack without comment. The disappointed expressions on their faces told her everything she needed to know about who was responsible. This was just the beginning of their campaign to force her out of the program through systematic harassment. The obstacle course run revealed new layers of the conspiracy against her. During the rope climb, she discovered that someone had applied a slippery substance to several sections, making grip nearly impossible. The wall scaling exercise presented similar challenges when loose handholds that had been solid the previous day suddenly gave way under pressure. Despite these setbacks, Kira adapted quickly, finding alternative routes and techniques that allowed her to complete the course within acceptable time limits. Her ability to overcome the deliberate obstacles only seemed to frustrate her tormentors further, escalating their efforts to undermine her performance. Hand-to-hand combat training introduced a new dynamic to the harassment campaign. Instructor Staff Sergeant Michael Torres demonstrated basic grappling techniques, emphasizing how proper leverage could overcome size and strength disadvantages. When it came time for paired practice, Kellerman volunteered to work with Kira, his intentions clearly malicious rather than educational. "Let me show you how real soldiers fight," he said with a predatory grin as they squared off on the practice mats. His first takedown attempt was far more aggressive than the drill required, intended to hurt rather than train. Kira absorbed the impact and rolled with it, using his momentum against him in a way that left him flat on his back wondering what had happened. "Lucky break," he muttered as he got back to his feet, but his second attempt was even more violent. This time Kira allowed herself a small demonstration of her actual capabilities, redirecting his charge with minimal effort and placing him in a submission hold that had him tapping out immediately. Torres observed the exchange with interest, noting how effortlessly she had neutralized a much larger opponent. "Good technique, Nakamura," he said, but there was speculation in his voice that suggested he recognized skill beyond what basic training should have provided. The afternoon brought urban combat scenarios in the training village, a collection of mock buildings designed to simulate real-world engagements. Teams of 4 recruits were assigned to clear structures, while instructors played the role of hostile forces using paint ammunition. Kira found herself paired with 3 recruits who had clearly been instructed to ensure her failure. As they approached their assigned building, her teammates deliberately positioned themselves to block her sight lines and limit her movement options. When the exercise began, they moved without coordinating with her, leaving her exposed and unsupported. The paint rounds that struck her vest came not just from the instructors playing enemy forces, but from friendly fire that was anything but accidental. Bronson's debrief was scathing in its criticism of her performance, focusing exclusively on her failures while ignoring the obvious sabotage by her teammates. Poor communication, inadequate positioning, insufficient aggression, he listed her supposed shortcomings for the entire group to hear. Maybe you should consider a transfer to a less demanding program. That evening, Kira discovered that her personal belongings had been searched and some items relocated or damaged. Her family photograph was crumpled, her letters from home had been read and scattered, and someone had poured cleaning solution into her shampoo bottle. The message was clear. She was not wanted here and would not be allowed to succeed quietly. Recruit Sarah Donovan, one of only 3 other women in the program, approached her during the evening equipment cleaning period. The red-headed former police officer from Michigan had been watching the systematic harassment with growing concern. "You know what they're doing, right?" she said quietly while pretending to work on her rifle cleaning. "This isn't about standards or performance. They're trying to break you because they can't accept that you belong here." Kira continued methodically cleaning her weapon, considering her response carefully. "I'm aware of the situation," she replied without looking up. But responding emotionally would only give them what they want. Donovan studied her with curious eyes, noting the calm precision of her movements and the way she seemed completely unaffected by the day's events. "There's something different about you," she observed. "You move like someone with serious training, not just basic military preparation." The observation hung in the air between them, neither confirmed nor denied. Kira had learned long ago that revealing too much about her background too early often created more problems than it solved. Better to let people draw their own conclusions while she focused on completing the program, despite the obstacles being placed in her path. As lights out approached and the barracks settled into restless sleep, Kira lay awake planning her response to the escalating campaign against her. She could continue absorbing the harassment passively, hoping that her tormentors would eventually lose interest, or she could begin demonstrating just enough of her real capabilities to discourage further aggression without revealing the full extent of her training. The decision would shape everything that followed in the remaining weeks of the program. The third week arrived with an atmosphere thick as summer humidity, tension crackling between recruits like electricity before a storm. Bronson gathered the remaining candidates in the briefing room, their numbers already reduced from the original 42 to 37 as 5 recruits had either quit or been dismissed for various failures. His weathered face showed no sympathy for those who had fallen short. "Today we separate the warriors from the wannabes," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The upcoming field exercise will test everything you've learned so far. 72 hours in the wilderness with minimal supplies, hostile forces hunting you, and objectives that must be completed or your entire team fails." Kira listened carefully as he outlined the mission parameters, noting how the team assignments seemed strategically designed to maximize her disadvantages. She found herself grouped with Kellerman, Carlson, and 2 other recruits who had made their hostility toward her increasingly obvious. The message was clear: succeed despite being surrounded by people actively working against her, or fail and provide Bronson with justification for her dismissal. The supply distribution revealed another layer of the campaign against her. While other teams received complete equipment sets, her team's gear allocation was mysteriously short several critical items. No night vision goggles for her position, a malfunctioning radio, and a sleeping bag with a convenient tear that would make the cold mountain nights particularly miserable. Kellerman accepted the equipment shortages with theatrical disappointment. "Guess someone will have to make do with less," he said while examining the incomplete manifest. "Lucky for us, some people are used to not meeting standards anyway." The transport trucks dropped the teams at scattered locations throughout the training area, a rugged section of wilderness that stretched for miles in every direction. Dense forest, rocky terrain, and creek beds that could turn treacherous with the slightest rainfall created natural obstacles that would test both navigation skills and physical endurance. Kira's team moved out with Kellerman, assuming leadership despite having no formal authority to do so. His first decision involved deliberately choosing a route that avoided the most direct path to their first objective, claiming tactical necessity while actually ensuring they would arrive behind schedule and under pressure. As they pushed through thick underbrush and across steep ravines, the systematic exclusion continued. Radio communications were conducted without including her. Map reading was deliberately kept from her view, and rest stops were called and ended without consulting her needs or readiness. Her teammates seemed determined to treat her as unnecessary cargo rather than an integral part of their mission. The first objective required locating and securing a supply cache hidden somewhere within a Twasquirmal area of particularly dense forest. Other teams were also searching for their own caches, creating a competitive element that added urgency to an already challenging task. Failure to locate the cache within the allocated time window would result in immediate team disqualification. Kellerman's leadership proved increasingly erratic as the hours passed without success. His initial confidence gave way to frustrated anger as their search pattern yielded nothing but false leads and wasted effort. The other team members began questioning his decisions, but their criticism focused on everything except the obvious flaw in their approach. Maybe if we actually used all our team members instead of treating this like some kind of punishment detail, Donovan suggested during a brief rest stop. She had been assigned to a different team, but encountered them during the search phase. You're ignoring your smallest team member who might be able to access areas the rest of you can't reach. Kellerman's response was predictably hostile. We don't need dead weight slowing us down when time is critical. Some people need to learn their limitations before they get real soldiers killed. The accusation stung more than Kira cared to admit. Not because it was true, but because it revealed the depth of prejudice she was fighting against. These men had decided her capabilities based purely on appearance and gender, refusing to consider any evidence that contradicted their preconceptions. Their minds were closed to possibilities that challenged their worldview. As evening approached and their search remained unsuccessful, desperation began replacing bravado in her teammates' behavior. The realization that they might actually fail because of their own stubborn prejudices started to penetrate their thick skulls. Carlson was the first to crack, suggesting they might want to consider alternative approaches. What if we let her try some of the tight spaces we couldn't fit through? He whispered to Kellerman when he thought she was out of earshot. Maybe she could spot something we missed. The suggestion was met with immediate resistance from Kellerman, who saw any reliance on her capabilities as a personal defeat. His pride was now more important than mission success, a dangerous mindset that Kira recognized from previous encounters with similar personalities. Men like him would rather fail spectacularly than admit they had underestimated someone they considered inferior. Night fell with their team, still searching fruitlessly through the forest, their flashlights creating dancing shadows that seemed to mock their efforts. Other teams had already located their caches and moved on to subsequent objectives, leaving Kellerman's group falling further behind schedule. The pressure was mounting, and Kira could sense that her teammates were beginning to panic. She had been observing the terrain and developing her own theories about likely cache locations, but her attempts to contribute had been consistently dismissed. The irony was not lost on her that the very people who complained about her supposed inadequacies were actively preventing her from demonstrating her actual capabilities. Their prejudice had become a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. The radio crackled with updates from other teams reporting successful objective completions, each transmission adding to the growing tension within their group. Kellerman's leadership was crumbling under pressure, his commands becoming increasingly desperate and contradictory. The team was on the verge of complete breakdown, and they still had 2 more days of the exercise remaining. Kira made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. Instead of continuing to passively accept their exclusion and incompetence, she would begin demonstrating exactly why their assumptions about her were not just wrong, but dangerously stupid. The second day of the field exercise dawned gray and drizzling, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mixture of mud and slippery leaves. Kellerman's team had spent the night huddled in inadequate shelter, their failure to locate the supply cache leaving them without the additional equipment and food rations that successful teams now possessed. Morale had deteriorated along with the weather. Kira watched her teammates struggle with basic fieldcraft as they attempted to prepare a morning meal using minimal supplies. Coulson couldn't get his portable stove to function properly in the damp conditions, while the other two recruits, Davidson and Torres, argued about water purification procedures they clearly didn't understand. Their incompetence was becoming dangerous as dehydration and hunger began affecting their judgment. "We're running out of time," Kellerman announced, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "If we don't find that cache in the next 2 hours, we'll be too far behind to complete the remaining objectives." His leadership had devolved into increasingly desperate micromanagement, with contradictory orders that revealed his own confusion about their tactical situation. The team was fragmenting under pressure, each member beginning to prioritize individual survival over collective success. Trust had evaporated along with their confidence. Kira finally spoke up, her voice calm against the backdrop of their escalating chaos. "The cache is approximately 300 meters northwest of here, hidden in a rock formation near the creek bed. I identified the location yesterday evening, but wasn't included in the decision-making process to investigate it." The silence that followed her statement was broken only by the steady patter of rain on leaves. Her teammates stared at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. The idea that she had solved their problem while they flailed around ineffectively challenged everything they believed about their relative capabilities. "How could you possibly know that?" Kellerman demanded, his tone suggesting she was either lying or had somehow cheated. "You've been with us the whole time, and we've searched that entire area twice." Kira shouldered her pack and began moving toward the indicated location without waiting for permission or consensus. Track pattern analysis, vegetation disturbance indicators, and basic tactical logic, she explained over her shoulder. The cache placement follows standard military doctrine for supply concealment in forested terrain. Her teammates had little choice but to follow, their curiosity overriding their prejudice, as she led them through the forest with confident navigation that contrasted sharply with their previous aimless wandering. She moved through the undergrowth like someone who had spent considerable time in similar environments, her path selection revealing knowledge that extended far beyond basic military training. The cache location proved exactly where she had predicted, concealed beneath camouflaged covering in a natural depression between two large boulders. The discovery provided not only the missing equipment and supplies they desperately needed, but also a psychological blow to her teammates' assumptions about her competence. Their relief was mixed with resentment at having their expertise shown up so dramatically. "Lucky guess," Kellerman muttered as they distributed the recovered supplies, but his voice lacked conviction. The precision of her prediction and the confidence of her movement suggested knowledge rather than fortune. Something about their supposedly weakest team member didn't match the narrative they had constructed. The afternoon brought urban warfare simulation in a mock village constructed specifically for training purposes. Plywood buildings, narrow alleys, and multiple levels created a complex environment where teams had to locate and neutralize hostile forces while avoiding civilian casualties represented by cardboard figures scattered throughout the area. Kira's team approached the scenario with the same dysfunctional dynamics that had characterized their previous efforts. Kellerman insisted on maintaining tactical leadership despite his obvious limitations, while the others continued treating her as expendable support rather than an integral team member. Their entry into the village was textbook example of how not to conduct urban operations. The first contact with opposing forces revealed the consequences of their poor coordination. Paint rounds from concealed positions marked 3 of her teammates as casualties within minutes, leaving only Kira and Davidson to complete the mission objectives. The sudden reduction in their numbers forced a fundamental shift in team dynamics that Kellerman could no longer control from his theoretical leadership position. Davidson looked to her with desperation, replacing his previous disdain. "What do we do now?" he asked, apparently forgetting that he had spent days dismissing her capabilities. "The remaining targets are in heavily defended positions, and we don't have enough firepower to assault them directly." Kira assessed their tactical situation with the calm analysis of someone who had faced similar challenges before. The mock village layout offered multiple approach routes that their opponents wouldn't expect from supposedly inexperienced recruits. Her plan required precision, timing, and technical skills that went well beyond basic training curriculum. Follow my lead and maintain noise discipline, she instructed Davidson as she began moving through the village with fluid efficiency. Her path selection utilized shadows, cover, and concealment in ways that suggested extensive urban combat experience. She seemed to understand sight lines and defensive positions with an intuitive grasp that impressed even the instructors monitoring the exercise. The first target elimination came so quickly that Davidson barely registered what had happened. One moment, they were approaching a defended building. The next moment, paint marked the opposing force member who had been covering the entrance. Kira had somehow flanked his position using a route that shouldn't have been possible for someone without advanced training. Two more eliminations followed in rapid succession, each demonstrating tactical sophistication that left Davidson struggling to keep pace with her movements. She anticipated enemy reactions, exploited their positioning mistakes, and coordinated her attacks with precision that bordered on the professional. The mock village scenario was being dominated by someone her teammates had written off as inadequate. The final objective required accessing a building with multiple defenders covering all apparent approach routes. Standard tactical doctrine suggested the position was nearly impossible to assault with only two attackers. Davidson was ready to concede defeat when Kira pointed toward a maintenance access that offered an unconventional solution to their problem. Within minutes, they had successfully completed the mission with efficiency that drew attention from instructors throughout the training area. The opposing forces never understood how their defensive positions had been compromised so thoroughly by what they assumed were novice recruits. Kira's performance had been flawless, but she made no effort to claim credit or highlight her contributions. As they regrouped with their paint-marked teammates, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Kellerman's bluster was replaced by confused silence, while the others looked at her with new awareness that their previous assumptions might have been catastrophically wrong. The question now was whether pride would allow them to acknowledge their mistake or drive them to escalate their efforts to undermine her. The final night of the field exercise brought an unexpected development that would test more than just military skills. As teams consolidated their positions for the culminating phase, reports filtered through the radio network about a missing recruit from Delta Team. Private Jennifer Walsh had become separated from her unit during a river crossing and hadn't been seen for over 4 hours. Bronson's voice crackled through emergency communications to all team leaders. All units maintain current positions and establish security perimeters. Search and rescue operations are being coordinated by base personnel. Do not attempt independent search efforts. The order made tactical sense from a training safety perspective, but Kira recognized the bureaucratic delays that would follow. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with temperature dropping and wind increasing to dangerous levels. Time was becoming a critical factor in what could easily become a life-threatening situation rather than just a training exercise. Kellerman gathered his team around their small fire, the flames dancing wildly in the gusting wind. "Well, that settles our evening plans," he said with apparent relief. "We maintain position until morning and let the professionals handle the search. Not our problem anyway." His callous dismissal of a fellow recruit's danger revealed the fundamental character flaws that had made him an ineffective leader throughout the exercise. Kira studied the topographical map by firelight, calculating probable drift patterns and survival timeframes based on current weather conditions. Her analysis suggested that standard search protocols might not locate Walsh before hypothermia became a serious threat. Davidson noticed her intense focus on the map. "What are you thinking, Nakamura?" His tone had shifted from dismissive to genuinely curious, a change that reflected his growing awareness of her capabilities since the urban warfare demonstration. She pointed to a section of the river system downstream from Walsh's last known position. creek current and terrain features would channel someone toward this area, she explained quietly. There's a series of rapids about 2 miles south that creates natural collection points for debris and potentially for people swept downstream. The logical assessment hung in the air like smoke from their fire. Everyone understood the implications, but acting on her analysis would require disobeying direct orders and potentially endangering their own safety. The ethical dilemma pitted following commands against potentially saving a life, a choice that separated true soldiers from those who merely followed procedures. Coulson shifted uncomfortably on his improvised seat. Even if you're right about the location, we don't have authorization to leave our position. Bronson was pretty clear about staying put until morning. Kira folded the map and secured it in her jacket pocket. I'm going to conduct a limited reconnaissance patrol to confirm my assessment. You can maintain position as ordered and report my absence as unauthorized action if questioned. Her statement transformed the situation from theoretical discussion to immediate decision point. She was offering to take complete responsibility for violating orders while giving her teammates plausible deniability if her actions resulted in disciplinary consequences. The gesture revealed more about her character than weeks of previous interactions had demonstrated. "Wait," Davidson said, as she prepared to leave their perimeter. "If you're right about this, you'll need backup for safety reasons. Creek beds can be dangerous in the dark, especially with weather conditions deteriorating." Kellerman's response was immediate and harsh. "Nobody leaves this position without my authorization, and I'm not giving it. We follow orders and let trained personnel handle emergencies." End of discussion. The confrontation crystallized everything that had been building between them throughout the training program. Kellerman's rigid adherence to authority represented one approach to military service, while Kira's willingness to accept personal risk for others demonstrated a different set of values. The philosophical divide could no longer be ignored or rationalized away. "I understand your position," Kira replied calmly, "but I'm not requesting permission. A fellow soldier is in potential danger, and I have skills that might be relevant to her survival. My conscience won't allow me to prioritize procedural compliance over human life." She moved toward the edge of their perimeter with fluid efficiency, checking her equipment and preparing for solo movement through hostile terrain. Her actions demonstrated the kind of moral courage that distinguished true leaders from those who merely held positions of authority. The decision was hers alone, but its consequences would affect everyone in ways they didn't yet understand. Davidson made his choice by shouldering his own gear and following her toward the perimeter edge. "I'm not letting you go alone," he said firmly. "Two people have better chances than one if something goes wrong." His decision triggered a cascade of responses from the remaining team members. Torres looked conflicted, clearly torn between following orders and supporting a rescue mission. Coulson remained seated, but watched their preparations with obvious internal struggle. Kellerman's authority was dissolving as his teammates chose principle over procedure. "You're all making a serious mistake," Kellerman warned, his voice tight with anger and desperation. "This insubordination will be reported, and careers will be ended. Think about what you're throwing away for someone who was careless enough to get herself lost." The callousness of his final statement revealed everything his teammates needed to know about his character. While they debated procedures and consequences, somewhere in the darkness a fellow recruit was fighting for survival against elements that cared nothing about regulations or protocols. The choice between human decency and bureaucratic compliance was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Kira disappeared into the forest with Davidson close behind, their movements so quiet that within moments they had vanished completely into the night. Her navigation skills guided them toward the river system with confidence that suggested extensive experience in similar terrain. Behind them, the remaining team members faced their own decisions about loyalty, duty, and what it meant to be a soldier. The search for Walsh would test more than just their tactical skills. It would reveal who among them possessed the moral courage to act when action was needed, regardless of personal consequences. For Kira, it represented an opportunity to demonstrate why she belonged in the program. not through competition or confrontation, but through the fundamental military virtue of never leaving a fallen comrade behind. The forest floor beneath their feet was treacherous with rain-licked rocks and hidden roots that threatened to send the unwary tumbling into darkness. Kira moved through the terrain with sure-footed confidence that left Davidson struggling to match her pace. His heavier frame and less refined technique making him sound like a freight train compared to her whisper-quiet movement through the underbrush. "How are you so good at this?" he whispered during a brief halt to check their bearings. "Moving like that takes years of practice, not just basic training exercises." She paused her map, reading to consider how much to reveal about her background. "My family emphasized outdoor skills from an early age," she replied carefully. Hunting, tracking, wilderness survival were considered essential education rather than recreational activities. The partial truth satisfied his curiosity without revealing the full extent of her training. Years of specialized instruction in reconnaissance, evasion, and unconventional warfare weren't typical family activities, but Davidson seemed willing to accept her explanation at face value. His focus remained on the immediate mission rather than probing deeper into her mysterious competence. They reached the river system within 30 minutes, the sound of rushing water masking their approach to the search area. Kira's tactical assessment had been accurate. The creek showed clear signs of recent high water and debris accumulation that would trap anything swept downstream. She began methodically checking collection points where current patterns would deposit floating objects. Davidson took position as overwatch while she moved along the bank, his rifle ready to provide cover if they encountered the opposing force teams that were still operating in the area. The training exercise continued despite the emergency, adding another layer of complexity to their unauthorized rescue mission. They could be eliminated from the program for leaving their assigned position, but they could also be court-martialed if they failed to help a fellow soldier in genuine distress. The first 3 debris accumulations yielded nothing but branches, trash, and equipment that had been lost during previous training cycles. Kira's systematic search pattern was efficient but time-consuming, and she could feel precious minutes slipping away as Walsh's survival window continued to narrow. Hypothermia worked with relentless efficiency in conditions like these. At the 4th location, she found evidence that someone had been there recently. Broken branches at shoulder height, disturbed vegetation, and most importantly, fabric caught on a thorn bush that matched the standard issue uniform worn by all recruits. Walsh had reached this point, but apparently moved on, possibly seeking better shelter or continuing downstream toward perceived safety. Davidson examined the evidence with growing respect for Kira's tracking abilities. "You read sign like someone who's done this professionally," he observed. "Military scouts don't usually develop skills this refined during basic training cycles." His comment hit closer to the truth than she was comfortable discussing. Professional tracking and reconnaissance had indeed been part of her background, but explaining those circumstances would raise questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Her presence in this training program was more complicated than anyone realized, including herself. They continued downstream, following a trail of subtle indicators that would have been invisible to less experienced eyes. Disturbed earth here, broken vegetation there, and most telling of all, a boot print in soft mud that confirmed Walsh was alive and mobile when she passed through this area. The signs were perhaps an hour old, suggesting they were closing the distance. The sound reached them before they saw anything. Weak calls for help carried on the wind, barely audible above the creek noise. Kira immediately changed direction toward the source, moving with increased urgency while maintaining the noise discipline that had kept them undetected. Davidson followed her lead, impressed by how she balanced speed with tactical awareness. They found Walsh trapped in a partially collapsed shelter she had attempted to construct using deadfall and debris. Her improvised refuge had protected her from the worst of the weather, but left her pinned when shifting logs caught her leg. She was conscious but showing early signs of hypothermia, her speech slightly slurred and her movement sluggish. "Thank God," Walsh whispered as they appeared out of the darkness. "I thought I was going to die out here." My leg is stuck, and I can't feel my feet anymore. Davidson immediately began assessing her medical condition while Kira examined the structural problem trapping her. The logs were heavy, but not impossible to move with proper leverage and technique. However, shifting them incorrectly could cause further collapse and potentially serious injury to Walsh or themselves. We need to stabilize the debris pile before attempting extraction, Kira instructed Davidson. Her approach was methodical and professional, treating the situation like a technical rescue rather than an emergency panic response. One person maintains structural support, while the other creates clearance for victim removal. Her calm competence under pressure impressed both Davidson and Walsh, who had expected typical recruit-level fumbling rather than expert rescue techniques. The systematic approach she employed suggested training that went far beyond standard military preparation, but neither of her companions was in a position to question her methods while their lives potentially hung in the balance. The extraction took 20 minutes of careful work, with Kira directing each phase of the operation while Davidson provided muscle and Walsh remained as still as possible to avoid destabilizing their precarious situation. When they finally freed her from the collapsed shelter, it was clear that her leg was badly bruised but not broken. "Can you walk with support?" Kira asked while fashioning an improvised splint from available materials. "We need to get you back to base medical facilities, but evacuation helicopters won't fly in these weather conditions until morning." Walsh tested her weight on the injured leg and grimaced. "I can make it with help, but it's going to be slow going." Her gratitude was obvious despite the pain she was experiencing. "You guys saved my life by coming out here. I know you weren't supposed to leave your position." The return journey would be more challenging than their approach, complicated by Walsh's mobility limitations and the need to avoid detection by other teams or instructors who might question their presence in an unauthorized area. Kira calculated routes that would minimize exposure while providing the easiest terrain for someone with a leg injury. As they began moving toward base, Davidson reflected on the evening's events. Everything about Kira's performance suggested training and experience that extended far beyond what a typical recruit should possess. Her navigation skills, tactical awareness, medical knowledge, and rescue techniques all pointed toward a background that she hadn't shared with anyone in the program. The question was whether her mysterious competence would help or hurt her standing with instructors who were already looking for reasons to eliminate her from consideration. Unauthorized missions, even successful ones, often carried consequences that were difficult to predict or control. Her decision to prioritize human life over following orders revealed character traits that would either earn respect or provoke retaliation, depending on who was making the judgment. The base medical facility buzzed with activity as Walsh received treatment for her injuries. The bright fluorescent lights, a harsh contrast to the darkness they had navigated during the rescue mission. Kira and Davidson waited in the corridor outside, their muddy uniforms and exhausted faces drawing curious glances from medical personnel who knew they should have been in the field rather than delivering casualties. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, the base commander, emerged from Walsh's treatment room with an expression that revealed nothing about her assessment of the situation. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her steel-gray eyes missed no details as she examined the two recruits who had violated direct orders to conduct an unauthorized rescue operation. "Recruits Nakamura and Davidson, report to my office immediately," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Your team leader has already provided his version of events, but I want to hear your perspective on tonight's activities." The walk to the administration building felt like a death march, their boots echoing hollowly in the empty corridors. Davidson kept glancing at Kira, clearly worried about the consequences they faced for disobeying orders. Court-martial proceedings, dismissal from the program, and permanent black marks on their military records were all possibilities hanging over their heads like storm clouds. Kellerman was waiting outside the colonel's office, his expression smug with vindication. His formal report had undoubtedly painted their rescue mission as reckless insubordination rather than successful life-saving action. The fact that Walsh was alive and receiving treatment seemed less important to him than proving his teammates were unfit for military service. Colonel Hayes gestured them into her office, a Spartanly decorated space that spoke to her no-nonsense approach to command. Maps covered one wall, commendation certificates another, and her desk was organized with military precision. She settled behind it and studied them with the penetrating gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating soldiers under pressure. Explain your decision to leave your assigned position against direct orders. She began without preamble. Team leader Kellerman reports that you abandoned your post despite his explicit instructions to maintain position until morning. Kira met the colonel's gaze steadily, accepting full responsibility for her choices. Ma'am, tactical analysis suggested that Private Walsh's survival was time-critical given weather conditions and water temperature. Standard search protocols would not have located her before hypothermia became life-threatening. Her response was direct and professional, acknowledging the order violation while explaining the reasoning behind her decision. She made no attempt to shift blame or minimize the seriousness of disobeying commands, but she also refused to apologize for prioritizing human life over procedural compliance. Davidson stepped forward to add his perspective. Colonel, Recruit Nakamura's assessment proved accurate. We located Walsh exactly where she predicted, and her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Another few hours of exposure could have resulted in a fatality. The colonel's expression remained neutral as she processed their explanations. Walsh's medical evaluation confirms hypothermia onset and potential for serious complications if exposure had continued, she said after consulting her notes. However, that does not address the fundamental issue of military discipline and chain of command. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited for her judgment. Military justice operated under different rules than civilian law, and unauthorized actions could result in severe consequences regardless of their ultimate success. The colonel's decision would set precedent for how initiative and moral courage were valued versus strict adherence to orders. Recruit Nakamura, your personnel file makes interesting reading, Colonel Hayes continued, opening a folder that contained more information than Kira expected to see in a standard training record. Your background includes skills and experience that are not typical for someone entering this program through conventional channels. The statement hung in the air like a challenge, suggesting that the colonel knew more about Kira's history than she had previously revealed to anyone in the training program. The carefully constructed narrative of her background was apparently not as secure as she had believed, and probing questions about her qualifications were inevitable. Ma'am, I have experience in outdoor activities and emergency response, but nothing that exceeds the capabilities expected of military personnel, Kira replied carefully. Her answer was technically truthful while avoiding specifics that might compromise operational security or reveal information she wasn't authorized to discuss. The colonel's slight smile suggested she recognized the diplomatic evasion for what it was. Emergency response training that includes advanced wilderness rescue techniques, tactical movement through hostile terrain, and medical stabilization procedures under combat conditions, she read from the file. This level of proficiency typically requires years of specialized instruction. Davidson listened to this exchange with growing amazement as he realized that his teammates' mysterious competence had much deeper roots than anyone had suspected. The skills she had demonstrated during the rescue mission were apparently just the tip of an iceberg that extended far below the surface of her official record. The colonel closed the file and leaned back in her chair. The unauthorized rescue mission succeeded because of exceptional individual capabilities rather than standard military training. That raises questions about both your background and your reasons for entering this particular program. The interrogation was becoming more pointed, focusing on aspects of her history that Kira preferred to keep private. Her presence in the training program served purposes that extended beyond simple career advancement, but explaining those motivations would require revealing information that could compromise ongoing operations. 3 sharp knocks on the office door interrupted the increasingly uncomfortable discussion. Drill Instructor Bronson entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with anger and his jaw set in a hard line that promised unpleasant consequences for everyone involved. "Colonel, I need to speak with you about tonight's events," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "These recruits have undermined the entire training program with their grandstanding heroics, and I want them dismissed immediately for insubordination and failure to follow orders." His dramatic entrance shifted the dynamic in the room, transforming what had been a measured discussion into a confrontation between different philosophies of military leadership. Bronson represented rigid adherence to authority and procedure, while the rescue mission embodied initiative and moral courage that sometimes required breaking rules. The colonel's response would determine not only Kira and Davidson's fate in the program, but also establish which approach to military service would be valued and rewarded. The decision would echo through the remaining weeks of training and potentially influence the careers of everyone involved in the incident. Bronson's demand for immediate dismissal filled the office like toxic smoke, his anger radiating outward in waves that made even the experienced colonel pause to consider her response. His face had taken on a dangerous shade of red, and his hands clenched and unclenched as he struggled to contain his fury at what he perceived as a direct challenge to his authority. These recruits think they can pick and choose which orders to follow based on their personal feelings, he continued, his voice rising with each word. If we allow this kind of insubordination to go unpunished, we might as well abandon any pretense of military discipline and turn this into some kind of civilian adventure camp. Colonel Hayes maintained her composure in the face of his outburst, her decades of command experience evident in how she handled subordinates who allowed emotion to override professional judgment. "Drill Instructor Bronson, you will lower your voice and present your concerns through proper channels rather than making demands in my office." The rebuke was delivered with quiet authority that reminded everyone present of the actual chain of command. Bronson's face darkened further, but he stepped back and attempted to regain control of his temper. His hatred for Kira had clearly evolved beyond simple training program standards into something more personal and dangerous. "Ma'am, these individuals have demonstrated that they cannot be trusted to follow orders under pressure," he said, forcing his voice into more professional tones. "Military effectiveness depends on absolute obedience to chain of command, not individual interpretation of appropriate action." His argument had merit from a purely procedural standpoint, but it ignored the fundamental question of whether rigid adherence to orders should supersede moral obligations to fellow soldiers. The philosophical divide represented 2 different approaches to military leadership that had been debated for centuries. "Recruit Nakamura," Colonel Hayes said, turning her attention back to the central figure in the controversy. "Your actions tonight demonstrated capabilities that exceed standard expectations for someone at your level of training. I want a complete explanation of your background and qualifications before making any decisions about your future in this program." The direct order left no room for evasion or diplomatic half-truths. Kira understood that her carefully maintained cover story was about to be exposed, along with the real reasons for her presence in what everyone assumed was a routine training program. The consequences of revelation could extend far beyond her own career prospects. "Ma'am, my background includes specialized training in reconnaissance and unconventional operations," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Prior to entering this program, I served with units that required advanced skills in wilderness survival, tactical movement, and emergency medical procedures." Bronson's expression shifted from anger to confusion as he tried to process this information. Special operations background would explain her mysterious competence, but it raised even more questions about why someone with such qualifications would be going through basic training programs designed for inexperienced recruits. "What unit?" Colonel Hayes pressed, clearly recognizing that important details were still being withheld. "Your service record shows conventional assignments that don't account for the skill level you've demonstrated." The moment of truth had arrived faster than Kira had anticipated. Her actual background involved classified operations that couldn't be discussed in present company, but refusing to answer would only deepen suspicions about her motives and loyalties. She found herself trapped between operational security requirements and immediate accountability. "Ma'am, I request permission to discuss my complete service history in a classified setting," she replied, hoping that the colonel would understand the implications without requiring explicit explanations that could compromise ongoing missions. Davidson watched this exchange with growing bewilderment as he realized that his teammate was apparently much more than she had ever indicated. The rescue mission had revealed advanced capabilities, but the suggestion of classified operations implied a level of experience that placed her in an entirely different category from typical program participants. Bronson seized on her evasion as confirmation of his suspicions. "This is exactly the kind of secretive behavior that undermines unit cohesion," he declared. "How can we trust someone who won't even acknowledge their own background and qualifications?" His accusation touched on legitimate concerns about trust and transparency within military units, but it also revealed his inability to accept that his initial assessment of her capabilities had been completely wrong. Pride was preventing him from acknowledging that appearance-based assumptions had led him to fundamentally misunderstand one of his own recruits. Colonel Hayes stood and moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the lights of the base beyond. The complexity of the situation was clearly weighing on her as she balanced competing interests and obligations. Her decision would establish precedent for how similar situations would be handled in the future. "Drill Instructor Bronson, you are dismissed," she said without turning around. "I will handle this matter personally and inform you of any decisions that affect your training program." Bronson's face went through a series of expressions as he processed what amounted to removal from the decision-making process. His authority over Kira's fate was being transferred to higher levels, effectively sidelining him from the resolution he had demanded. The dismissal was professional but final. "Ma'am, I strongly protest this decision," he began, but the colonel's raised hand cut him off before he could continue. "Your protest is noted and will be included in my report," she replied, still facing the window. "You are dismissed, Drill Instructor." The forced exit left Bronson with no choice but to comply, though his expression promised that this confrontation was far from over in his mind. He had invested too much pride and authority in his assessment of Kira's worthlessness to accept being proven wrong so dramatically. His departure left the office feeling somehow larger and less oppressive. Colonel Hayes turned back to face the two recruits, her expression thoughtful as she considered her options. The rescue mission had succeeded, but it had also revealed complications that extended far beyond simple training program management. Whatever Kira's real background, it was clearly more significant than anyone had realized. "Recruits, you will report to my office tomorrow morning at 0800 hours for further discussion," she announced. "Until then, you are restricted to base and will not discuss tonight's events with anyone." Dismissed. The temporary reprieve provided time for higher-level consultations about how to handle a situation that had grown beyond local command authority. Kira's fate would be determined by people who understood the classified aspects of her background, but the damage to her cover story was already irreversible. The next morning arrived with deceptive calm, but tension crackled beneath the surface like electricity before a storm. Word of the rescue mission had spread through the barracks despite orders for silence, creating an atmosphere of speculation and divided loyalties among the remaining recruits. Some viewed Kira as a hero who had saved a fellow soldier, while others sided with Bronson's perspective that she was a dangerous maverick who threatened military discipline. Kira made her way to the colonel's office precisely at 0800 hours, her uniform immaculate and her bearing professional despite the uncertainty surrounding her future. The night had provided little rest, as she considered the various scenarios that might unfold during what could be her final meeting as a program participant. Colonel Hayes was waiting with two additional officers she didn't recognize, a stern-faced man in army dress uniform with intelligence insignia, and a woman wearing navy dress blues with special warfare pins that suggested extensive operational experience. Their presence confirmed that her situation had escalated beyond routine training program management. "Recruit Nakamura, please be seated," Colonel Hayes began formally. "These officers are here to discuss aspects of your background that require security clearances to address properly." Major Richardson from Army Intelligence and Commander Martinez from Naval Special Warfare Command. The introductions revealed the scope of interest her actions had generated among higher-level commands. Intelligence and special operations communities maintained careful oversight of their personnel, even those temporarily assigned to conventional training programs for cover purposes or professional development. Major Richardson opened a classified folder and consulted documents that apparently contained information about her actual service record. "Petty Officer First Class Nakamura, your assignment to this training program was designed to evaluate leadership potential and tactical decision-making under different circumstances than your usual operational environment." The use of her actual rank and the revelation that her participation was an evaluation rather than routine training sent shockwaves through her understanding of the situation. She had believed herself to be undercover for operational security reasons, but apparently her superiors had been testing her capabilities in ways she hadn't realized. Commander Martinez leaned forward with interest. "Your performance during the rescue mission demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and moral courage we were hoping to observe. However, your cover status has been compromised by subsequent events, particularly Drill Instructor Bronson's refusal to accept alternative explanations for your capabilities." The situation was becoming clearer, but more complicated. Her mysterious competence had been deliberately designed to test how she would handle discrimination and skepticism while maintaining operational security. The rescue mission had succeeded beyond expectations, but also forced premature revelation of her actual qualifications. Colonel Hayes consulted her own notes before continuing. "The question now is how to resolve the current situation without completely compromising ongoing evaluations or damaging relationships within the training program. Drill Instructor Bronson continues to demand your dismissal despite evidence that contradicts his assessment." As if summoned by the mention of his name, urgent knocking echoed from the office door. Colonel Hayes granted permission to enter, and Bronson burst into the room with barely controlled fury radiating from every muscle. His face was flushed red, and his hands trembled with suppressed rage. "Ma'am, I demand to know why this recruit is receiving special treatment from outside commands," he said without acknowledging the presence of the intelligence and special warfare officers. Her insubordination should result in immediate dismissal, not closed-door meetings with classified personnel. Major Richardson's expression turned glacial as he observed Bronson's breach of protocol. "Drill Instructor, you are interrupting a classified briefing without proper authorization. You will remove yourself immediately or face charges for security violations." The threat of formal charges should have prompted immediate compliance, but Bronson's anger had progressed beyond rational judgment. His pride and authority had been challenged too directly for him to back down gracefully, even when faced with superior officers who clearly outranked him. "I don't care about your classified games," Bronson shot back, his voice rising to dangerous levels. "This recruit has been undermining my authority since day one, and I won't tolerate special treatment just because she has connections in high places." His accusation revealed the depth of his misconceptions about the situation. Rather than accepting that his initial assessment had been wrong, he had constructed a conspiracy theory that protected his ego while painting himself as the victim of outside interference. Commander Martinez stood with fluid grace that hinted at her own combat background. "Drill Instructor, you are relieved of duty pending investigation into your conduct and judgment. Report to base security for escort to temporary quarters." The summary removal from duty struck Bronson like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions as he processed the complete collapse of his authority and career prospects. The investigation would undoubtedly reveal his pattern of harassment and discrimination that had created this entire situation. "You can't do this to me," he protested, desperation replacing anger in his voice. "I've served faithfully for 15 years, and I won't be destroyed by some secretive operation that undermines everything I've worked for." His appeal fell on deaf ears as base security personnel entered the office to escort him away. The dramatic removal sent a clear message about how seriously his superiors viewed his conduct and judgment. His career was effectively over, destroyed by his own prejudice and inability to recognize exceptional capability. As the office door closed behind Bronson and his escorts, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The primary obstacle to resolving Kira's situation had been removed, but significant challenges remained in managing the fallout from recent events. Major Richardson reopened his classified folder and consulted additional documents. "Petty Officer Nakamura, your evaluation period will be extended to allow completion of the training program under modified circumstances. Your actual background will remain classified, but alternative explanations for your capabilities will be provided to satisfy curiosity." The solution offered a path forward that protected operational security while allowing her to complete the mission that had brought her to the program. However, the damage to her cover story was permanent, and future assignments would need to account for her increased visibility within special operations communities. Commander Martinez added her own perspective on the situation. "Your actions during the rescue mission demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and moral courage that we value in special operations personnel. The evaluation has been more successful than we anticipated, despite the complications that arose." Colonel Hayes concluded the meeting with practical instructions for moving forward. "You will complete the training program as scheduled, but with modified parameters that account for your actual qualifications. Drill Instructor Torres will assume responsibility for your remaining training, and all previous disciplinary actions are rescinded." As Kira left the office, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed within 24 hours. The rescue mission had exposed her cover, but also validated her capabilities in ways that exceeded original expectations. The real test of her character had come not from planned evaluations, but from an unexpected crisis that demanded immediate moral choices. The training program's final week arrived with an atmosphere transformed by recent revelations. Staff Sergeant Torres had assumed Bronson's duties with a professional approach that focused on capability development rather than intimidation tactics. The remaining recruits sensed the fundamental shift in command philosophy, though none fully understood the classified circumstances that had precipitated the change. Kira found herself in an unusual position as speculation about her background continued to circulate through the barracks. The official explanation provided limited details about prior service experience, but her demonstrated capabilities during the rescue mission had elevated her status among peers who previously dismissed her potential. The transformation was both gratifying and complicated. Davidson approached her during equipment preparation for the culminating exercise, his expression reflecting the curiosity that had been building since their unauthorized mission. "I keep thinking about that night in the forest," he said quietly. "The way you moved, the tactical decisions you made, the medical procedures you knew. That wasn't basic training talking." She continued, checking her gear with methodical precision, considering how much additional information could be safely shared. "Some experiences prepare you for challenges that textbooks can't teach," she replied diplomatically. "Military service takes many different forms, and not all of them are reflected in standard personnel records." Her response satisfied his immediate curiosity while maintaining the operational security requirements that still governed her actual background. The partial revelation had created a delicate balance between honesty and necessary secrecy that would define her remaining time in the program. Kellerman had become notably subdued since Bronson's removal, his earlier bravado replaced by uncomfortable awareness that his treatment of her had been both wrong and potentially career-damaging. His attempts at reconciliation were clumsy but seemed genuine, suggesting that recent events had prompted some self-reflection about his assumptions and prejudices. The final combat exercise was designed to test everything the recruits had learned during 16 weeks of intensive training. Multiple scenarios would challenge their tactical skills, leadership capabilities, and ability to function under extreme pressure. Success or failure in this culminating event would determine who earned graduation and who was dismissed from the program. Torres briefed the exercise parameters with professional efficiency, outlining objectives that required both individual excellence and team coordination. The scenarios have been modified to account for reduced numbers, but the standards remained uncompromised. Only those who demonstrated genuine competence would advance to their next assignments. Kira found herself appointed as team leader for the urban warfare scenario, a recognition of her capabilities that would have been unthinkable under Bronson's command. The appointment carried both opportunity and responsibility, as her team's success would reflect not only on her leadership skills, but also on the wisdom of trusting her with authority. Her team consisted of Davidson, Donovan, and 2 other recruits who had previously maintained neutral positions regarding her qualifications. The group dynamics were more positive than any she had experienced during the program, though underlying tensions remained from weeks of previous conflict and misunderstanding. The urban combat scenario presented a complex tactical problem involving multiple hostile positions, civilian considerations, and time constraints that demanded efficient decision-making under pressure. Kira's approach emphasized thorough planning followed by flexible execution, principles that reflected her special operations background without explicitly revealing it. Her tactical briefing demonstrated leadership skills that surprised even those who had begun to suspect her true qualifications. She assigned roles based on individual strengths, established communication protocols that maximized information flow, and developed contingency plans that addressed likely complications. The professionalism was unmistakably authentic. Davidson served as her second-in-command, their previous cooperation during the rescue mission having established mutual trust and understanding. His reconnaissance training complemented her tactical expertise, creating a leadership combination that inspired confidence among their teammates. The scenario began with methodical advancement through the mock urban environment, each movement coordinated to maintain security while progressing toward objectives. Kira's team moved with precision that contrasted sharply with the more conventional approaches employed by other groups. Her unconventional warfare background provided advantages that became apparent as the exercise progressed. Contact with hostile forces revealed the quality of her tactical instruction. Rather than relying on overwhelming firepower or frontal assault, she employed maneuver warfare principles that allowed her smaller team to defeat larger opposing forces through superior positioning and timing. The demonstration was masterful without being ostentatious. Donovan observed the tactical excellence with professional appreciation. "You fight like someone who's done this for real," she commented during a brief tactical pause. There's a difference between training proficiency and combat experience that's hard to fake. The observation was astute and potentially problematic, as it suggested that her cover story remained insufficient to explain her actual capabilities. However, the immediate demands of the exercise prevented detailed discussion of background issues that would need to be addressed later. The final phase of the scenario required assaulting a heavily defended position that had defeated 2 previous teams attempting the same objective. Standard tactics had proven inadequate against the defensive preparations, requiring innovative approaches that went beyond basic training curriculum. The challenge was designed to test creative problem-solving under extreme pressure. Kira's solution involved a coordinated assault from multiple directions, using deception and misdirection to create opportunities for decisive action. Her team executed the complex plan with precision that reflected both her leadership skills and their growing confidence in her judgment. The result was overwhelming success against supposedly insurmountable odds. Torres observed the exercise completion with obvious satisfaction, recognizing exceptional performance when he saw it. His subsequent debrief focused on the tactical innovations that had made success possible, using the achievement as a teaching moment for other recruits who had struggled with conventional approaches. As the day concluded and final evaluations were completed, the transformation in group dynamics was unmistakable. Respect had replaced skepticism, cooperation had supplanted hostility, and recognition had overcome prejudice. The journey from mockery to admiration was complete, though questions about her true background remained unanswered. The evening brought unofficial celebrations as successful recruits prepared for graduation ceremonies that would mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of new challenges. Kira participated in the festivities while maintaining the professional distance that her classified status required, but her inclusion in the group represented vindication of principles that extended beyond personal achievement. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, the North Carolina sun casting long shadows across the parade ground where families and dignitaries gathered to witness the culmination of 16 weeks of intensive training. Only 28 recruits remained from the original 42, their survival through the program marking them as exceptional candidates for advanced military assignments. Kira stood in formation with her fellow graduates, the weight of her achievements balanced against the knowledge that her journey had been far more complex than anyone realized. The dress uniform felt different now, representing not just successful completion of training, but validation of principles that extended beyond personal accomplishment. Colonel Hayes delivered the keynote address, her words emphasizing the values of courage, integrity, and selfless service that define true military professionals. Her eyes found Kira briefly during remarks about moral leadership and the willingness to make difficult decisions when lives hung in the balance, a subtle acknowledgement of the rescue mission that had changed everything. The medal ceremony recognized exceptional performance across various categories, with Kira receiving the award for tactical excellence and leadership under pressure. The recognition was well-deserved, but carried ironic undertones, as her most significant contributions remained classified and could never be publicly acknowledged. Davidson stepped forward to present her with the unit's unofficial award for courage, recognition voted on by her fellow graduates. His remarks were brief but heartfelt, focusing on her willingness to risk everything for a fellow soldier and her demonstration that true strength often came in unexpected packages. "We learned that assumptions based on appearance can be dangerously wrong," he said while presenting the award. "Some of the strongest among us don't look like what we expected strength to look like, and some of the wisest voices come from those we initially thought had nothing to teach us." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, reflecting the complete transformation in attitudes that had occurred since that first day when she stepped off the transport truck to skeptical glances and barely concealed mockery. The journey from derision to respect had been difficult, but ultimately rewarding for everyone involved. Kellerman approached her after the ceremony, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine remorse for his previous behavior. "I owe you an apology that's long overdue," he said quietly. "My prejudice nearly got someone killed, and it definitely made me a worse soldier and a worse person. Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like." His apology represented more than personal growth. It symbolized the broader lessons about judgment, assumption, and the danger of dismissing people based on superficial characteristics. The transformation was incomplete but significant, suggesting that some minds could change when confronted with undeniable evidence. Donovan joined the conversation with her own reflections on the program's lessons. "You taught us all something important about not judging books by their covers," she said with a smile. "But more than that, you showed us what it means to put principles before convenience and people before procedures." The observation captured the essence of what had made the rescue mission so significant. It wasn't just about saving Walsh's life, though that remained paramount. It was about demonstrating that moral courage sometimes required breaking rules and accepting personal risk for the benefit of others. Staff Sergeant Torres conducted the final formation dismissal, officially ending their time as recruits and recognizing them as graduates qualified for their next assignments. His leadership during the final weeks had provided a stark contrast to Bronson's approach, demonstrating how professional competence could coexist with human decency. As families and friends mingled with graduates during the reception, Kira reflected on the complex journey that had brought her to this moment. The original mission objectives had been achieved, but the personal growth and relationship development had exceeded all expectations. She had arrived as an undercover operative and was leaving as someone who had earned genuine respect through demonstrated character. Commander Martinez appeared at her side during the reception, her presence a reminder that some aspects of the program remained classified despite the public celebration. "Your performance exceeded our most optimistic projections," she said quietly. "The evaluation was successful beyond anything we anticipated when this assignment began." The assessment confirmed that her mission had accomplished its intended purposes while providing unexpected benefits for everyone involved. The program had been designed to test her capabilities under different circumstances, but it had also revealed important truths about leadership, prejudice, and the danger of superficial judgments. Major Richardson joined their conversation with his own perspective on the outcome. "The lessons learned here extend beyond individual evaluation," he observed. "This program has provided valuable insights into how unconscious bias can undermine military effectiveness and how proper leadership can transform unit dynamics." Their comments suggested that the experiences of the past 16 weeks would influence future training programs and leadership development initiatives. The impact would extend far beyond her personal situation to affect how the military approached diversity, capability assessment, and the development of inclusive leadership practices. As the reception continued and old barriers dissolved into new relationships, Kira experienced the satisfaction of mission accomplished in ways both professional and personal. The laughter had been replaced by respect, the mockery transformed into admiration, and the isolation overcome through demonstrated competence under pressure. If this story of proving yourself against all odds resonated with you, drop a comment about your favorite moment or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when everyone doubted them. Sometimes the most powerful victories come not from meeting expectations, but from shattering them completely. The graduation ceremony marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of new challenges that would build on the foundation established during these transformative weeks. For Kira, it represented validation that authentic leadership transcended rank, appearance, and preconception, earning respect through actions rather than demanding it through authority. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parade ground and families began their departures, the lessons learned would endure long after the ceremony was forgotten. True strength revealed itself not through intimidation or bluster, but through quiet competence, moral courage, and the willingness to stand up for principles even when the cost was high. The program had ended, but the transformation it produced would influence every future challenge these graduates would face. They had learned to look beyond surface appearances, to value substance over style, and to recognize that the most powerful capabilities often came in the most unexpected packages.